And here we go. Guys, very happy to have you for this podcast. So we've got Shams and Damien and me, of course. And
Hello.
what we're going to do is we're going to build on last week's session, which ended with a question which Shams asked, which was what keeps me motivated? So that the question was directed to me. And I said suffering. So I think it's time to elaborate on that because it's a bit odd when you get a response like that, but it's not odd at all, actually. But yeah, so let's elaborate on this one. So you ready, guys?
Always, it's rock and roll.
Cool. I feel today is going to be very enjoyable for some reason. I like talking about suffering. It's like my
You're like, I like talking about suffering with this smile and like a wistful gaze into the distance. So, okay, maybe that's a little creepy. I don't know.
I mean,
We'll
Zen
see,
is
we'll
creepy, man. Like, yeah. You know, Shams, you keep asking me about the Bodhidharma. I mean, you sent me a couple of texts on that.
Yes.
And the Bodhidharma was a guy who actually meditated in a cave for 8 years.
Okay.
And they kind of fed him and made him drink water to keep him alive. So man, it's very extreme. And he didn't want to have any student. And one student was very stubborn. And to prove that he's going to be like a very good student, what he did is he cut his finger and offered it to the master. So
Wow.
So Zen is creepy, man. It's extreme. It's not for the faint-hearted. Like it's heavy metal in a way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never really thought about that, but yeah, that's pretty metal.
It reminds
my
me of the
perspective,
scene from John Wick. I think it's John Wick 3, where he cuts his finger and he gives to that guy, I don't know what was his name, to prove that he's going to be faithful. And actually he ends up not being faithful, it was just a scene. But he does it and it's creepy as I mean, the whole series is creepy anyway with Keanu Reeves, but that cutting the finger part was like, ooh. All right. So we're starting it in a nice way with cutting off fingers. And all that.
Yeah.
Cutting off limbs.
Yeah. And I'm not going to edit the intro to today's session. Anyway, let's get back to So today's intro suggests that it's going to be a very extreme podcast. Maybe the most important one. I don't know. Anyway, so as the tradition suggests, I'm going to start with the story.
All right.
Ready? So
Yep.
the title of the story is Suffering, the Buddha, and the Tamarind Tree. Okay, obviously when I go through the story, you'll understand. So, so Buddha was walking in the forest, okay, peacefully, as he usually does. He's walking in the forest, and then there's a guy who was on his knees and praying to God, and actually complaining, why is all of that happening to me? And he saw Buddha. So Buddha was considered to be like a sort of God at that time. Okay, so the man falls to his feet and then he says, Lord Buddha, why is all of that happening to me? Then the Buddha asked, okay, what happened to you? And then the person says that, you know, I used to be very rich. I used to own property. I had lots of wealth. And I'm someone who has been living a very good and neat life. You know, I've been following the precepts. So when he's saying the precepts, it's the precepts in Buddhism, not to kill, not to steal, and things like that. So I've been following the precepts, and still my own ones tricked me, stole all my wealth, and kicked me out of the house. So now I'm on the streets. I've got nowhere to go. So how can this be happening to me? All right.
Okay, but wait, who tricked him, or who?
It's his own family members. So it's not mentioned in the tale, but I'm guessing the wife and the kids. Let's say.
Sure, sure. No, that's the one
Possibly,
thing I meant.
possibly,
Okay.
yeah.
So he used to be very wealthy, and
Yeah.
something his family betrayed him, and now
Exactly.
he's on his own.
Yeah.
Poor.
We could
Why is
link that to the property issues we have usually in households.
Hmm.
You know, people fight for property and all that.
Mhm.
Anyway, but that's
Okay.
what the person says. And then the Buddha looked at him and said, okay, tell me more. What do you really want from me? Okay. And then the guy says, now, before I say the next sentence, we need to bring into context the beliefs at that time. So these guys used to believe in reincarnation and all that. Okay. So the story takes that turn. So now the guy says, okay, how many more births do I need to take so that I'm liberated from the suffering of the world? I can no longer take it. Okay. So that was his question to the Buddha. It wasn't ending suffering now, but how many births I need to take to end the suffering that I'm going right now and which I will undergo in my next birth, let's say. And then there was a mango tree at the back. Okay, so the Buddha looks at the mango tree and says, okay, look at the back and you see how many mangoes there are in the tree. And the man looks at the back and says, yeah, there's a lot. And then the Buddha said, okay, you need to take as many births as the number of mangoes on that tree to be liberated from suffering. And the man goes all crazy. You can't be serious. I've been such a good man, and you know, I've done everything for my family. How can these things happen to me? That's not fair. And then the Buddha says, life is as it should be. And then he moved on. Okay? And the story doesn't end there. So he moves on now, continues to walk in the forest. Okay, very peaceful, not disturbed at all by what the man told him, actually. So full stoic mode, okay? Continues walking. And then he comes across another guy, okay, who sees him and said, oh, Lord Buddha, you are here. I had to ask you something. And then the Buddha said, okay, yeah, what's the problem? Tell me. And then the man says that, I've come here right now because just next to where I'm standing is a graveyard, okay? And I've just buried all my family members, my wife, my kids, okay? There was like a very bad disease in the village and everyone died. How is that really fair? Because I'm lonely now and I've always lived a very good life. I've been a good man. I've always done everything for my family. I've never cheated. I never stole, you know, live a very high quality life. And once again, same question. What do I really need to do so that I don't have to suffer? And how many times do I need to take birth again to be liberated from that samsara, which the Buddhists say, so, which is like the illusion of the world, okay? It's the samsara. So that I'm liberated from the samsara. And then the Buddha said, look at the back. You see how many white flowers there are near the graveyard, you know? And then the man says, yeah, there's a lot. And then once again, the Buddha said, you need as many flowers as you see right now, you need to take as many births as the number of flowers so that you're liberated from that suffering. Once again, same cry, oh, it's not fair. I've always done everything for everyone and life is not treating me fairly. But then the Buddha said, life is as it should be. And then he moves on, right? He continues to walk and he comes across another man, a third man. And the guy was actually working, he was carrying bricks and, you know, dropping it somewhere. And then the guy said, oh, Lord Buddha is here. I need to really ask him something. So he runs to the Buddha, falls on his feet and asks him, Lord Buddha, you've seen how much I work hard. I'm working the whole day. And during the night, I need to sleep on grass, on the ground. I'm lonely. I've got no one. And I'm like, you know, in India back in the day, there used to be like a group of people who used to be called the untouched.
Mm.
And they used to be like in a caste system, they all like the lowest one, and they do like the jobs no one else will do, which is like cleaning, and they were very poor. They were kind of neglected. Okay, so he talks about that. I've been such a good man, and why does life treat me so harshly? You know, I work so hard every day. Look at my hands, look at my feet. I'm all dirty. My skin is, you know, it's not in a good state, and I sleep on the ground every day. Why? Okay, how many births do I need to take so that I'm uh, out of that dukkha? So dukkha is suffering in Sanskrit. Okay, and the Buddha says, look at the tamarind tree at the back. Okay, and look at the number of leaves on that tree. You'll need to take as many births as the number of leaves on the tree so that you're free from suffering. And then the guy looked at the back and sees the number of leaves, and he smiles. And he says, thank you, Buddha. You've answered my question. And he's all grateful and continues to do what he has to do. And the story ends here. So I don't know what you guys took from it. I'll start with Shams. What do you get from it?
That's a tricky one, but the first thing that comes to mind is that I was like, why would the last guy actually be grateful for that answer? Why would he, you know, be happy? So I was trying to think from a different perspective. I'm like, well, technically there is an end. There's a finite number of leaves on the tree, even though it might, like, you're like a perspective, from your perspective, that might seem like a lot, but also from another perspective, it's a finite amount. So eventually you're going to be liberated from that suffering. So maybe if you have that sense of patience or a sense of stoicism of like, okay, I can do this. And I would think of all the people, now that I'm speaking out loud, of all the three people, the one who is the untouchable, who's used to doing the hard work, used to getting no thanks for it and not being treated well. He's used to suffering more than the others. The others seem to have come from a better position and then fallen into misfortune.
Yeah.
So they're comparing like, oh man, this is how life could be. And this is how life is now. Oh, woe is me. But if his life was always at the bottom and he's used to just struggling, then maybe being like, okay, yeah, I could struggle that many lifetimes. Like that's how I roll. Like I can do that. So it's interesting. It's almost like the blessing is having an easy life is almost in this, from this story, from this perspective, actually the not the curse, but like it's actually like a negative thing to have like blessings, because it's something that you can lose.
So that's a beautiful perspective, actually. And I would just add that during that time, we used to have a caste system, meaning there used to be a group of people who were like the intellectual ones, and then a group of people who just do manual work. And the Buddha was very against a caste system or a hierarchy. He used to say that you become a gentleman when you act like one, not because you're born in a certain family. Maybe the whole point of the story was because in the story, like the lowest caste is the one who gets the wisdom. And Sham is right. When you're used to hard work, when you've been through suffering, that's where you get the wisdom, actually. So I think that's a strong point, a very strong point. Yeah, cool. Damien, your turn.
Thank you. I think on a surface level, it really it boils down to how you're responding to that present moment that's presenting itself. And I think the differences between all of them is that the two first guys in the story seem to have a very much similar in that it's very short term, you know, burying the family is like short term, like drama, it's like hectic. And with the Buddha in that moment of darkness, the Buddha saying, look back, you're going to have to live another however many, like the flowers, and you're going to have to live all that. You're going to have to go through the suffering for so long. In those people's minds, they are experiencing that moment and they thought, oh my word, this is, I'm going to have to live in hell for all this time. So that's their perception of time. And where I think the guy at the end, he could have caught the joke of it, or he could have caught or he could have just like catch that, like almost that pain transmuted in that present moment where he looked back and realized and saw the amount of leaves and was like, and then he just kind of laughed, and in that he had that realization where and that was because of the endurance in the suffering. Either it is that he's had so much suffering and it's not just like a short term, it's been ongoing in the sense of he's worked, and when the Buddha said to him, look back, that's the amount of real lives you're gonna have to live, he kind of could have found the light in that suffering, because he's always been suffering, but in that moment the Buddha's like, look back, and that's where he kind of got that trigger, that spark. It could have been that small because of his life being so long in the darkness, and he got that spark that changed everything, that made him realize there is an end to this. Whereas other people looked back and said, oh my word, I'm going to have to endure the suffering for that long, and then their response in that moment was accentuating that turbulent time or that challenging time that they're in. So I think on face value, it's just how they all responded based on the experiences they were going through. Yeah.
Nice one. It definitely has to do with perspective, because the third guy had a very different perspective, and I'm thinking that maybe he smiled because he got the joke. Now, I think, I mean, in a lot of Zen tales, there is an element of humor in it. It's sometimes dark humor, right? But I think the Buddha used to joke around. So he said that on purpose, just to make people realize that, you're asking me something, but there's no end to suffering, actually. I mean, life is suffering. So he made that as a joke. I'm thinking.
He was like messing with them.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, well, sometimes you need to kind of poke in people's weak spots so that it can come out. It's almost just like bringing out the darkness inside. So you can poke at it so that they can kind of experience it, so that they can come to surface, so they can transmute it. So in a person that, what are you going to say? It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Or you just be like, the life is as it should be. So it's, and that's up to you to decide how you're going to experience what is being presented to you. So I think in the dark humor, or whatever the case may be, I think the Buddha very wisely gave them the information that they needed to move forward. And some people, it depends on the person, but it takes X amount of suffering to kind of get a realization. But the information is correct. It's all linear. It's all time. It's all like, it's all in this moment. So I think sometimes you get suffering is needed for realization. It's like a kid, or anyone for that matter, that touches a stove. Well, you need to burn to realize not to do it. So and it's a little bit like Jesus on dying on the cross. That I know I've mentioned this before, but
example.
I think that's been something that's kind of stuck with me. That's like, it's like a realization in the sense of like, it's like turning lead into gold. You got to like suffer, or no, you don't. You do. Suffering allows you to go through the experience, and you think, wow, I'm so detached from love. It feels like that way. Whereas that's love busy teaching you some of the most challenging lessons, or the deepest lessons deep within your soul. So I think that's that idea of Jesus dying on the cross, and kind of all his questions that came from deep within his soul came out. Why are you forsaken me? This type of vibe. And then once he was able to transmute that and rose again, from a very different perspective, I would imagine.
And I think the answer the Buddha gave to the first two is so spot on. He said life is as it should be. And the first two guys, so they were guys, yeah. The first two guys actually were saying something which I still hear in our current context. Like, I've always been nice. I've always done these things for people, and they still betray me. Or they still do that to me. Why is life not fair? And yeah, I mean, life sucks. That's how it is. It's like that. So that's what the Buddha said. Life is as it should be. So when someone does something for someone else, let's say, expecting that the person will do the same thing for you, is being naive and stupid, let's say. So every good thing you do, there's a higher chance that people are just taking advantage of you. There's a very high chance of that happening. But still you do it because it's the right thing to do. So I think that expectation thing comes into the equation here. When you do something, you need to keep your expectations realistic or very little, I would say. Because that caused suffering for these first two people. I've always done that for my family, always did that, and they still betrayed me. They still did that, still did that.
Well, you're very correct in saying, like, they do it, then they're doing it because they expect something in return, and that's not unconditional love.
Yeah.
It's like, that's doing it with an expectation. And now that it's gone out of what they think, or that person thinks should be what they get. And if it's not, that's also very selfish in that sense, where you're kind of doing it because you think they should be responding in that certain way. Or if you do it out of conditional love, you do it and you do it because you love and appreciate, and whatever comes your way, that it's not, you will continue acting with integrity or the way that from unconditional love. And in that story, it seems like they've gone this, and now he's putting the blame outside again. He's saying, oh, but my family, now I'm in this position. So he's all of a sudden put himself into like a victim mode until he learns the lesson to take back his power again.
Yeah. I had a similar thought about that. And it's contingent on the idea of the Buddha potentially lying in order to serve a higher purpose, which I think it's worth mentioning this story. The main scripture that I've read in the Buddhist tradition is the book, The Teaching of the Buddha. And it's like when I was in Malaysia, they had, how they have the Gideon Bible in a lot of places, in the hotels, they'll have it in the drawer. Well, in Malaysia, they had this is like the Gideon Bible of the Buddhist world, is this red book. And so I actually took it and kept it because I was like, I think that's what they want. They want people who are actually going to read it. So then I would read it over the years. And one of the stories really stuck with me. It's a metaphor. And the story goes that there are some children playing in a house, but the house is on fire. It's burning. And the Buddha is outside, and he keeps telling the children, come outside, the house is burning. But the children are having too much fun playing. They don't care. They're ignoring the house. So he's really beckoning them, come on, come outside. He's really like urging them, you're going to burn. You got to get out of the house. And they won't listen to him. And then he says, I have some candy out here. Would you, and then of course they come running out of the house straight to him, and the house collapses and the children are saved. But he didn't have any candy. And then it says in the book itself, it actually says that the metaphor is that the burning house is the world and the children are the people and the candy is enlightenment. And it implies that the whole idea of enlightenment potentially, at least in this story, it implies that it's not a real thing. It's just something you tell people so that they'll strive towards, the proper direction. It's like that candy, so that you can get the kids out of the house, but you don't actually have the candy. There is no candy. It's just, but you still save the children. So it's a good thing to tell that fib. So I had the same idea with this story of like, potentially the idea is that like, for them to transcend suffering and get what they want, which is to, get out of these lifetimes, or to live, to be born in a lifetime with no suffering, or to stop suffering in this lifetime, is that they need to like accept and transcend the suffering in that moment. So not to say like, okay, how long do I have to wait before circumstances arrange themselves for me to be happy? It's like, no, you need to find how to transcend the suffering under any circumstances in this moment or whenever. So kind of telling them like this many lifetimes, like hundreds and thousands of them, and then they're like, okay, well then I'm not going to bank on that. Because if you had said, well, 2 lifetimes or 1 or 5 even, they might have been like, okay, cool, I'll just suffer for 5 lifetimes. Like I can handle that. I can handle that, you know, and they wouldn't actually strive to get to that next level. While if it's like that many, then they might be like, okay, well, I better figure out how to find peace in this moment right now or in this lifetime, because, you know. So there's a potential that it seems like the Buddha is a wily character, from what you're saying, Girish. Like you said, you might be messing with them even. So, and last time we talked about Zen guys being a little,
being a bit
little
messy. Yeah.
yeah.
But I think that's extremely, extremely dark, actually. Because if he says, "Look, you just got two more, you know, those are the petals there, just the petals, 5 more lives," and the guy's like,
Oh, that's
"Okay,
nice.
can take a bit of a breath back," and there's a little bit of a spark there that he can kind of look back and relax a bit. Whereas the Buddha put him into eternal hell, and whether that it's like, and then the guy could have like jumped off and said, "Okay, there's about 500 petals. Well, okay, starting now, I'm going to jump off this bridge and commit suicide and do that 499 times." That unless the Buddha was looking at really making that eternal hell, or making that real intensifying that suffering, like it's already as dark as it is, and intensifying it in the guy's mental state, so that sometimes intensifying it, that's where you get to a place of like completely surrendering, where you look at it and you're just in that like state of like, oh my word, well, like you just kind of like let go of everything, and that's where you just kind of like, yeah, you let go. And that maybe that was what the Buddha was, because if you say 5 years, then they're still dependent on how many lifetimes they have, and so it is. But putting someone in intense dark can trigger an awakening, and that's because that's maybe he obviously sensed the energy and realized that maybe that's not, I mean, we theorizing, but in terms of, if like from a perspective, I would say like you would maybe want to kind of catapult that person from darkness, and when you think it can't get worse, he's put it on me for like eternity, and now all of a sudden in that you have this like letting go phase, and that letting go phase sometimes when that's the light. And I think that's happened to me in my own personal life, whereas like it's almost like this is happening right now. He's trying to free himself from it, or you're trying to like, so you're not accepting what you are experiencing. You are trying to get out of it. You're not accepting the moment. But I think what the Buddha strived to achieve was, whereas you kind of get that person to look back and realize, I can't get out of this. This is not 2 or 3 lifetimes. This is eternal. This is like this. There's a lot of whatever it is, and in that, it's you surrender. You acknowledge the situation you are in, and in that there's a power in terms of taking your power back. So that's where that's where what, from the perspective of the Buddha, how he could have assisted them on their journey there.
Yeah. I think
yeah.
he tried to make the first 2 realize that you two are overthinking it. You're thinking about when you're going to get liberated from the suffering, and you need to tackle it now. So when he says, you know, you need to take as many births as a number of mangoes, completely shatters their dreams. So in a way, thinking that there is like a heaven at some point is bad for people, because it doesn't make them focus on their lives right now, which comes back to that idea of the present moment. So the present moment is the only thing you have. And that's what you need to focus on, not on what will happen after so many births and whatever. It's too metaphysical. It's, you know, we are complicating things, and it's giving us bad hope that, you know, there is somewhere where there's no suffering, which comes back to the title of today's discussion. Why is suffering important? I mean, suffering is important because life is suffering. You know, we're born on this earth and we have to go through all these struggles, and that's how we learn. So that would be like an easy answer, I would say, because we learn from suffering. And I'll just make a reference to comics, just to prove a point. So in the comic books, DC, there was an edition where Superman became so powerful at one point that he was tossing hydrogen bombs off his chest. Okay. And that used to be the most boring phase of his life because he was so powerful. He could move planets. He could do anything he wanted. There was no joy to his life. You know, there was no struggle. He was so powerful. And I don't know whether the writers wanted to point that out, but there's a deep truth in that. If really your life is too easy, there's no struggle, it's boring. So we need suffering in a way to keep pushing, keep finding your limits, push your limits. And that's what you do with running or cycling, Damien. You're constantly pushing your limits. You want to find yourself. And when you're pushing, you are suffering. And exercise is a good example of that. You consciously push yourself. You suffer. Like when you run and you're sleeping during the night, the legs hurt. But deep down, you're happy. It's a good hurt. Like you've worked hard today. So there is a joy from suffering. And Shams and I, we were talking about David Goggins last week. And he puts himself through all these struggles, like things you wouldn't think a human being could do. And he enjoys that suffering because he's pushing himself to be a better version every time. So in a way, why are we so shy of suffering? We should be welcoming these struggles, these new challenges, these insults, and all these things we get. It makes us tough, and it's good for us. I mean, suffering is good.
So that's a very powerful perspective. And one thing that the one quote about suffering, that's kind of the antithesis of what you're saying. And I'm curious because I think suffering can lead down two different routes. The one that you're saying, which leads to growth and strength and even gratitude and appreciation for in the contrast.
Yeah.
And then the other side is from Star Wars. The I think Yoda says this to Anakin when it comes for training,
Yeah.
and he says he senses much fear in him.